Get on the train before it leaves the station. The truth train is coming, gonna run them down, run them down.
Hello there, folks. How you doing? We're here today talking about Scottish independence. Again, it's been a little while, but we're going to be talking about it today, and I'm going to tell you right now, right off the bat, I'm talking to the Unionists in Scotland today. And here is my mantra. The weak enslave themselves. The weak enslave themselves. Okay. Now, I have been following Scottish and UK politics and independence referendum and marches, but generally I've been watching since last year's elections. I've been following along with a lot of what's going on over there. Well, here's the thing, folks. I've obviously seen where it just seems pretty darn obvious that Scotland being in the UK doesn't really work to Scotland's advantage. The only way that, in my opinion, the way I see this, the only way that it's seen as an advantage to be in the UK is that some people have, I think, this misguided, kind of thought that being in the UK is easier. It's less, it has less unknowns, and so it's therefore less scary. But the fact of the matter is you look at it, as time goes on, more and more, England just disregards any of its obligations to the smaller nations in its union. It's become very obvious. In fact, what I'm going to be showing you today is just another example, but there's been plenty. There's been plenty. Let's start with the fact that Scotland didn't vote for Brexit. They didn't vote for it. They didn't want that. It wasn't part of. It wasn't what they. It just didn't fit with their ideology or what they, what they were looking for or where they were headed as a country. Leaving the EU just didn't fit with their, sensibilities. But Westminster in England pushed for the referendum. It barely passed, and I mean literally barely passed. And so now it's going forward. And it's creating problems. And it's creating the problem you're going to see here today. Now let's think about some other things. Remember back in 2014 when the first independence referendum happened. You remember Britain coming up to Scotland and campaigning and talking about how it's better together. And, Boris Johnson will never be prime minister. If you're interested in permanent membership in the EU or remaining in the EU, then you need to stay in the UK, right? Remember all these things they were saying? And look at how all of those things have dissipated. They've already fallen flat on all of those promises. You see? They're not taking you seriously. They're not going to take you seriously. They're never going to take you seriously. Okay? The smaller nations in the UK are just, an afterthought for Westminster. And that's clear from what I'm going to show you today. Because, this article I'm going to read you, particularly at the end, regarding, the policy or, the legislation that Westminster creates or is planning to create. To do this thing that they're looking to do regarding state aid. It's just very interesting at the end of this article how they suggest that it would appear legislators went with legislation to make this bill part of the state aid, or make state aid part of, make it something that is reserved to the Westminster Parliament. By doing that with legislation, it basically prevents this from being taken to the courts and having the courts decide. And what this article says is that that's a clear indicator that the government believes that they doesn't believe in their, doesn't have a whole lot of faith in their chances in court. So they had to make it legislation. So I thought that was very interesting as well. So we're gonna go through the article, and we're gonna look at all the things the article points out, and then I'm gonna play you some more clips of politicians asking questions about this, talking about this, and we're gonna get a full picture, really here, a fuller picture of the issues at stake here and why it's concerning. All right, here we go. Boris Johnson sets up clash with Scotland and Wales over state aid. Devolved nations to be denied say in industrial subsidies after the Brexit transition ends. Boris Johnson's government is planning to withhold power to control state aid from the UK's devolved nations when the Brexit transition ends, in a move that will outrage Scotland and Wales. The state aid proposal, which would give Westminster statutory powers to control policies for the entire UK, is expected to appear in a bill this autumn, laying the legal foundations of a new internal market, according to two people familiar with the plans. The legislation would further fuel accusations in Edinburgh and Cardiff which insist that industrial subsidies are a local matter of a post-Brexit power grab by London. The legislation has already attracted controversy, as it would enable Westminster to force Scotland and Wales to accept whatever new standards on food, environment, and in animal welfare it agrees to in future trade agreements with other countries. The proposals will increase constitutional tensions over how to allocate powers previously exercised in Brussels that will be returned to the UK after the Brexit transition period ends on December 31st. State aid is one of the most contentious issues in UK negotiations with the EU on their future economic relationship. The Scottish and Welsh governments have said that state aid policies should be devolved to them under current legislation, but the UK government insists it should have the power. The Scottish and Welsh governments have both said they want to remain closely aligned with the EU state aid rules. Michael Russell, Scotland's Constitutional Affairs Secretary, told the Financial Times last week that he had been told absolutely nothing about the UK government's intentions for the bill, but that it seemed likely state aid would be included. The Scottish government has accepted the need for a UK-wide framework, but insists the devolved nations must have a say. This will be an issue. It remains a difficult area, Mr. Russell said. Constitutional friction could help the pro-independent Scottish National Party as it seeks to remain in power in Edinburgh at elections next May. Recent polls suggest the SNP is on course for a landslide, and that a majority of Scottish voters already support leaving the UK. The Welsh government also braced for the legislation to include state aid. Its ministers hope London will promise to incorporate representation from Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland in any structure overseeing the new regime. Mr. Johnson sees the freedom to subsidize companies and make a clean break from the EU's state aid policies as one of the benefits which will directly result from leaving the EU. Yeah, but I feel that's only going to benefit Westminster and therefore England. Anyways, ministers have said that operational details of any future UK state aid regime will have to emerge in tandem with negotiations on the future EU-UK relationship. Under former Prime Minister Theresa May, the UK government drew up legislation to transpose current EU state aid rules into UK law as part of plans to deliver a Brexit much more closely aligned with the EU. At the time, Ivan McKee, Scotland's trade minister, said Scottish and UK officials were broadly in agreement on the proposed UK-wide aid regime, despite their differences over who should have the legal authority over it. The UK government said it considered the regulation of state aid to be a reserved matter, adding it would continue to work with the devolved administrations to seek to agree to a modern system for supporting British business in a way that benefits all within the UK. Legal experts said Westminster's decision to legislate to make state aid policy a reserved power was an implicit recognition that the government was not confident of winning the argument in court. Okay, I just want to say that again. Legal experts said Westminster's decision to legislate to make state aid policy reserved power was an implicit recognition that the government was not confident of winning the argument in court. George Peretz, QC, a lawyer at Monkton Chambers in London and an expert in EU law, said the UK government had previously contended that its undisputed powers to rule over any competitive practices also extend to state aid. I think that's not really arguable, and in seeking to settle the matter through primary legislation, if that is what occurs, it looks as if the government has now agreed that it isn't arguable either, he said. So, in terms of, because they made it a reserved power, it's never going to make it before a judge. Yeah, well, I guess in that sense it won't be arguable. You're right. Now, for any of you out there who may be thinking, this guy's anti-England, or anti-UK, not true. It's absolutely not true. I absolutely love England and Wales. Being a Doctor Who fan, you know what I mean? Cardiff, London, even, the whole of the UK, but, being a Doctor Who fan and a fan of a lot of other British television, Rowan Atkinson being another big name, obviously, that I, love from British television and that sort of thing. But not only that, British history and world history and European history. I mean, I just have a great fascination for these things. And so this is not because I hate Britain or hate England. It's not about that. It's just not about that. England's going to get on fine. It's big enough. It's gonna move forward, and they're gonna be fine, and they're gonna use their big stiff upper lip, and they're gonna be fine. So I'm not worried that England is going to topple if Scotland leaves the Union. I think it's ridiculous, personally, to think that England would suddenly topple because of one nation leaving the Union. I think England, and if Wales and Ireland continue to remain part of the UK, which with current way things are going, I don't know that that's really, going to work out in the future. We'll see. But as I say, the weak enslave themselves. And so if those other two nations choose to accept this stuff that's going to be coming out of Westminster, well, then they choose that. And like I said, the weak choose to enslave themselves. So that's their right to choose. So the big problem here is that I'm going to play a clip for you of Alan Smith right now. And he talks about how everybody in the UK right now is basically facing, well, everybody except in England, but in Wales and Scotland and in Northern Ireland, they are facing a choice between two nations. Okay? As the next year or two move on, these countries, these nations are going to be faced with a choice. Do we want to stick around in the UK and try to make internal change in the UK? Or do we want to become independent and rejoin the EU, whose policies and legislation and regulations and stuff we already agree with, and that sort of thing? So it's like a choice. Do you think we can stop this thing that's going on in Westminster? Do you think we can make any real positive or effective change regarding it? Seeing as you are Scotland and your population is much lower than England, so your representatives aren't going to be there in big numbers. So do we really believe that these smaller nations of the UK are going to be able to make meaningful change in the UK? Or is it actually more economic in terms of, the level of effort and the amount of distress and everything, is it a more economic option to become independent and rejoin the EU with a known set of circumstances and a known, outcome? So that's kind of what he's talking about. I'm gonna go ahead and let that play right now, so you guys can hear him outlining these things and throwing in some interesting facts along the way, and then we'll come on back.
The further point on disillusionment about the deal. Look, there's a really genuine question I would put to everybody watching tonight, and I don't want any answers tonight, but it's what you're going to need to think about in the next 6 months, year. If EU membership is your biggest thing, and I appreciate it's not the biggest thing for everybody, but if it is your biggest thing, you've got a choice to make. And the choice is, do you think it is more likely to achieve EU membership by remaining part of the UK and agitating for change within the UK, or going for independence? And that's a discussion that I'm perfectly happy to have on its merits. I do regularly with friends of mine who are Lib Dems or Labour, that I think it is legitimate and honourable to say, I want to stick with the UK and try and effect change here. My question is, how likely do you really think that is to happen? And Scotland, since 2014 in Brussels, the mood music, the attitude to us has changed absolutely. In 2014, a number of people in Brussels didn't quite get what independence was about. The fact that we're the national party, that didn't scan for some people. But then in the 2014 referendum, our definition of Scottish is, do you live in Scotland? Everybody living in Scotland had a vote, EU nationals included. So there's a queer sort of nationalism seen from a number of other countries' perspectives. We are very consciously welcoming and civic in our politics. What we've done since Nicola Sturgeon has been pitch perfect on the European question. I think the SNP has been solid in terms of where we want to get to. The EU is international solidarity in action. I'm in favour of a multilateral world. I want to see us cooperate with our closest friends and allies, not, as the Brexiters would prefer, the ones that speak English far on the other side of the world, that actually don't share many political values with us in many cases. And independence in Europe has been proven by Ireland over the last 4 years in a way that remaining within the UK and where that's going to take us has been proven for Scotland as well. So I really appreciate that for a lot of people that's an unwelcome choice, and it's quite dissettling and unsettling, and I'm afraid it's going to continue, because we are going to ultimately boil down to a choice between two unions, and it'll be which union works best for us. So I can say hand on heart, and I've taken some criticism in my own party for it, that I think we had to do everything we could to keep the UK as close to the single market, as close to the EU, ideally within the EU as possible. Look how much it's changed even in December when I was elected into Westminster. The idea was that we were hopefully looking at, well, possibly a second EU referendum, maybe a minority Labour administration. Yeah, we're only in July now, but it seems a parallel universe a million years ago. It seems fantasy, but it was the idea that, and I was replaced on the list in Brussels, so the party didn't lose out representation, Scotland didn't lose representation. But then, by virtue of the results elsewhere, in Scotland we voted significantly for pro-EU parties, the SNP and the Lib Dems, and the Labour representative from Scotland is the most pro-EU you'll get of many of them. And yet, despite all of that, Brexit happened, and my very first speech in the Westminster Parliament was lamenting the fact that despite our vote in Scotland, Brexit was imposed upon us. And for people who talk about the EU's democratic deficit, the UK's democratic deficit is actually a real one. And that's what we need to focus our efforts onto. I think change is coming whether we like it or not. We can make that change work for Scotland.
So I think Alan's point there is extremely valid in the fact that he's saying this conversation needs to happen. And it does. But it needs to happen in a way, it needs to be a discussion. Not like a lot of the things I see going on nowadays when it comes to this type of stuff. poo slinging at each other. Everybody's just flinging mud and poo at each other and screaming at each other, and nobody's listening. But this situation is going to require intelligent minds and listening. Okay? Because it's getting out of control. It's getting worse. It seems to be that that's the trend, and it's only going to get worse. This choice to leave the EU, for those that think it's a great choice, the point is, in the short term, it's going to be a huge problem, for a burden for the entire UK at the moment. When and Scotland is quite honestly being ignored when they never wanted it in the first place. 67%, I think it was 65 or 60. It was like 60, between 65 and 67% in favor of remaining in the EU during the Brexit vote in Scotland. That's nearly 2/3 of the population. That's a significant portion of the population, you see. So I believe his concerns are valid. And yes, I do believe very soon Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales are going to be faced with the choice between two unions. They're going to be looking at what it was like under the previous union that they were part of, and being part of the one market as a result of being part of that union. And then they're going to have to look at what it means to be part of the UK. And so he's pointing out that that these countries, these nations, are going to have a choice between two unions. It's going to come up here soon. Because, quite honestly, do you want Westminster instituting these panels, or these whatever you want to call them, panels of boards of, that they'll create all around the UK that will be able to override like a decision that comes out of devolved parliament in that country? Let's say for Scotland, for instance. Let's say the devolved parliament makes a decision that the UK determines is not in the interest of the new marketplace that they're trying to create, right? So they can actually override and veto the devolved parliaments. And so the question regarding this, as you saw in the article, is that the nations of the UK have agreed that there needs to be some kind of structure and that type of thing or whatever, but they disagree about who should run it. And that's essentially what this comes down to. Westminster is taking control of it. And that is going to be the point of this next clip coming up, where Alan Smith is asking some just very basic questions regarding this. And he's saying that if there's not certain things in place, that it's a power grab, and he has very specific questions. And I want you to see how he is answered, because the way he is answered sums up the way that Westminster treats the devolved nations. Okay? All right, here we go.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The European Parliament, the Court of Justice, the European Commission has got 60 years of jurisprudence in how to deal with these issues. Now, the reality is, under these proposals, every single power, budget and competence, not just of the Scottish, Welsh Parliaments and the Northern Ireland Assembly, but also local government in each of those countries, will be subject to a politically appointed panel that has no jurisprudence whatsoever. What will be the Scottish Parliament, Welsh Parliament and Northern Ireland Assembly's rights to input people onto that panel, and what dispute resolution mechanisms will they use? Because if this is not a fair and impartial arbiter, it is a power grab over every single competence we have.
Mr Speaker, perhaps I can clarify once more in case it's not been clear enough. There is no power grab, this is a power surge. We are ensuring that all devolved policy areas stay devolved. There are additional powers that are returning to the devolved administrations.
Well, with that response, it couldn't be any clearer. Okay. Jesus, what is up with that guy? He thinks that was a clear response? Okay, number one, I love the way he starts out answering Alan Smith, where he's like, in case it hasn't been clear enough already, let me try to make it clearer again, like he's acting all, offended or whatever. It's just like, what, dude? Okay, fine. Hopefully he's going to get to an explanation here, right? No! He goes on to talk about this isn't a power grab, it's a power surge. Sorry? What does that mean? What? I mean, that's just stupid. Like, if you expected that to be something that clears up what you were trying to say, you're an idiot. That doesn't clear up anything. That's vague as hell. Dude. Seriously. Alright, so let's move on. Does he address Alan's question about what mechanisms will be used? Will the Welsh and Scottish and Northern Ireland Dáil parliaments be able to input people on to this panel that will be making these decisions? You notice he doesn't address those questions. But he's talking about how it's clear, and he's been clear, and he's acting all offended about it. This sums up Westminster's treatment of the devolved nations. This guy, right there, sums it up. He's ridiculous. He makes no sense. But he thinks like what he's saying is the goddamn gospel. Like it makes sense. He actually thinks he's being clear. There. Not addressing any of the specific concerns raised by Alan. I mean, that's, to me, sums up Westminster's treatment of the devolved nations. Alright. So recently, Mr. Johnson, Boris the Clown as I like to call him, recently decided right now during the pandemic was a good time to try to campaign a bit and whatever and head to Scotland, and he wants to help and and that type of thing, but apparently he didn't want to meet with Nicola Sturgeon. He avoided her like the plague. Yeah. Interestingly enough. So he goes around Scotland or whatever. I want to just say it was funny on Twitter because, there was a concern. A lot of people were just like, why is Boris coming here? We don't want him here. There was a lot of that. I mean, the Scots don't like the Tories to be, for one, most Scots, a great deal of the Scots don't like the Tories to begin with. And Boris is pretty much their least favorite of all of the Tories. At least in my 1 year, in the last year since I've been watching. Now there could be something in the past that I'm not aware of that the Scots could hate another Tory even worse, maybe Thatcher, I don't know. Anyways, so, but for me, within the last year, there is, of all the Tories, it would seem to me that most Scots have a dislike for Mr. Boris the Clown. So I wanted to just put this out because Nicola wanted to put out a tweet, wanting to ask, you're just letting Scots know, hey, it's okay, Boris is coming. It's okay that he's coming. And then she put up a very interesting piece of artwork that I'm going to show you now on the way out. So that wraps up this video about, my feelings about what's going on over in the UK. Brexit, Scottish independence. I mean, if nothing else, folks, I'm not telling you to jump ship with the UK. I am telling you to have the conversation about it, though. Because ultimately, let me tell you one more of my biggest fears for Scotland right now. Because I know England's going to move on. I know England's going to be fine. But here's my concern for Scotland. That oil hasn't run out yet. There's still some there. And it will probably be there for at least some number of years. That revenue, if reclaimed by an independent Scotland, could be used, invested in that sort of thing, and could help Scotland get up and running and its government on its feet a lot quicker. So that's one thing that I consider. One other worry that I have, and it's still regarding the oil. My concern is what's going to happen in Westminster regarding Scotland when that oil runs out. When it actually does run out some years from now. What is Westminster going to do then? Because are they going to be as willing to fund Scotland if there's no longer that income? This is a real concern for me, not because of any other reason than I've seen Westminster and their track record and how they act. And I guarantee when that runs out, they're going to be looking for some way to, make up for it, but it's probably going to end up going badly for the devolved nations. So this is just a concern I have about the future, and it's why I think Scotland needs to act urgently. I do applaud Nicola that she is actually taking care of her people right now at this time with this pandemic, and she is making the decisions to keep Scotland safe and has been very, very, effective in that. Many people, not even people outside of Scotland, prefer to tune in to hear her coverage about coronavirus and stuff because they find her reassuring. And so Nicola's been doing a very great job, and obviously independence hasn't been something that's been getting talked about in Scotland. Now, well, unless Jackson Carlaw is the one talking about it. He's the one that's been trying to talk about it and poo-poo it, but most of the SNP have put independence aside during this pandemic. The SNP has been focusing on keeping the people of Scotland safe. The devolved parliament there, which is a majority SNP. I will also point out the numbers for the numbers for yes for independence in Scotland have been going up during the pandemic, and it's just these things are a trend showing that things aren't getting handled very well. And people are beginning to notice it, and they're beginning to develop opinions. So I encourage people to continue to watch and learn and develop opinions based on what they're seeing. So, all right, I leave you with this meme, which was tweeted by Nicola Sturgeon just the other day, the night before Boris's little trip to Scotland, which wasn't hugely popular, but he went anyway. So if you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see you.